All right, so I believe that we are now streaming here. Talon Muse, I'm reporting in from Dawson County, my office here in Lexington, and I have Extension educator Samantha Daniel here to talk a little bit about kind of what she's seeing out at the Grant Stump Research Center, correct?
Yep, that's right. Thank you, Talon. Can you hear me okay? Just double
I
check.
sure can. Yep.
All right, sounds good. So yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm here actually to show you guys our prairie strips that we have here. So this is the prairie strip sign. Prairie strips are part of the CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, through the USDA, Farm Service Agency. And so these prairie strips here were planted back in April of 2023. Since it's a little later in the season, we're not going to see as many like flowering forbs and whatnot, but we have a lot of native grasses, and we have, see, there are definitely going to be some weeds in here, of course, but we have a lot of the native species. So this area here was planted with an average diversity mix. And that mix, we worked with a, a farm biologist through the USDA office, and we were able to select a mix for this area here in Perkins County, Nebraska, which is much drier, more arid than the eastern part of the state or even the central part of the state. So folks that are interested in planting prairie strips, if you work directly with the FSA, with your USDA service center, they can help you selecting the right mixes. So this mix had 7 different native grasses. And we can see here that's some yellow Indian grass. And then there were also 16 native forbs and legumes. So this strip goes, you can see it kind of curving, goes along the edge of our pivot here at this research farm. And in other sections of the farm, we have the high diversity mix, which instead of just 16 forbs and legumes had 24 in those mixes. And we also have a section that is rain fed or dry land. So what is the purpose of prairie strips? So really there's 3 main goals, 3 main benefits, I suppose you could say, with prairie strips. And first off is erosion. It helps to reduce erosion significantly. This prairie strips program actually started in Iowa State, and they've had 13 years of research, doing trials on farmers' land, smaller plot trials and whatnot. And they found that just converting as little as 10% of your farmland, of a farm field, to prairie strips can reduce sediment loss or erosion by 95%. It can reduce runoff and phosphorus and nitrogen loss by 85 to 90%. So it's a great way to enhance the quality of our water, and to make sure that all of our chemicals and our nutrients that we're putting in our field are not ending up in surface water or groundwater. These plants are also great at with water infiltration. These native plants have very robust and strong stems, so it helps them to stay upright when we have excessive rainfall, and they're able to help stop that water from just running off somewhere that we don't want it to be, and it helps to infiltrate it down into the soil. So one other thing I wanted to show that we have here is we have this time-lapse camera. So this time-lapse camera was installed from the Platte Basin time lapse. So if you ever even just Google Platte Basin time lapse. It's a really cool program where they have time lapse cameras all across the state to look at how water basically moves through the state of Nebraska. And so we also, with this camera, we've been able to capture the progression and the development of our prairie strips. And we've also captured a lot of pheasants. The pheasants absolutely love these prairie strips. We constantly get pictures of pheasants. We've gotten pictures of other birds and other types of wildlife, but the pheasants definitely utilize this. Um, so it's really great for that as well. So
And Samantha,
yes,
so this prairie strip, some of these, you mentioned pheasants. Pheasants Forever will also offer some tips and potentially some even like help with putting in prairie strips for pheasants, correct?
yes. So there are definitely incentives for planting prairie strips. You can get up to 50% cost share for the establishment of the prairie strips. Some of these seed mixes, especially the higher diversity ones, can be expensive, can be up to $1,000, maybe $15 or $1,500 per acre if you go with the really high diversity. Some of the lower diversity or average diversity mixes can be anywhere between 250, maybe 300 or 400 per acre. Just depends on really your location and your goals and the field that you're looking at putting them in. Um, but yes, there is incentive programs and there's rental payments for 10 to 15 years to help offset the loss of the crops that normally would have been grown in this area that the prairie strips are now in. One thing too that's a good thing to consider is if you have areas in your fields that are just really not very productive and you're not really getting that return on investment from planting your commodity or other crops in that area, the strips can be planted in those areas, and then you're going to get those benefits, not just the economic, the monetary benefits, but these strips are going to help with, as I said, erosion control. It's going to help reduce nutrient loss, wildlife habitat, but also habitat for beneficial arthropods, pollinators, parasitoids, natural enemies, things like that. So anything that increases that diversity of plants on your farm it's really going to pay dividends eventually. The thing we have to remember is these types of things are going to take a little bit of time. These, like I said, were planted in 2023. So they're pretty well established now after 3 years. Really, 3 years is the minimum to get them established. There is some maintenance that's required. It's not a lot, but the first year they do require some mowing. And if you have a lot of weeds, then there might be some mowing required for that. But it is considered a permanent establishment. Like I mentioned, the contract is usually 10 to 15 years. And there are some, I guess, guidelines for like the width of the strip. It can be anywhere from 30 to 120 feet wide. So it just depends on really the amount of water that you're trying to intercept with these. If you have an area with a lot of runoff, you have a lot of rainfall, they're going to be probably wider strips than areas that have less rainfall, less runoff. So this is why it's really, really great to work with the farm biologists and the FSA, because they can come out and help you decide, what is the best option for your operation.
Yeah,
Um,
Samantha, that
yeah,
sounds like a pretty kind of good or potential option for fields that maybe have streams or anything like that, where there may be like already setbacks and things like that for having to be far enough away from the stream with pesticides and those
yes,
kinds of things, like manure stockpiling, I know. required
Absolutely.
setbacks, those kinds of things. It could
Yep.
be a potential option for some of that. And then I actually, here at the Manure Expo here
Hmm.
earlier this summer, I talked with someone from Iowa State who was talking about prairie strips and soil health and all that kind of stuff. And I was asking him how it changes weed management
Hmm.
if these are on the sides of the field. And he said that these native plants and just kind of the diversity actually makes the system really resilient. So it
Yes.
didn't really actually impact weed management for the most part when it comes to making applications maybe nearby these prairie strips.
Yep. And I would say that's definitely true. I think we can see that here. The first year or two, this area was much more, I guess, dominated by weeds. But as the native grasses have really established themselves with other native plants, here we have a nice little forb. Um, we still have some weed species in here, of course, but they're not nearly as plentiful as they were before. So yeah, I think, of course, it's going to require that proper planning, really making sure we're picking the best location for the prairie strip on our fields, and of course making sure we have that we get them established well that first year or two, making sure we're mowing and following those requirements. But it's really not too labor intensive. Like I said, mowing, um, that's really kind of one of the main requirements, and just making sure that we can't exceed 25% of the crop field, the cropland area per field. It has to be less than 25% planted to prairie strips. So really, I think it's that 10 to 15% is the ideal. And
Yeah,
believe it or
you
not, it's
you
like
had
starting to
mentioned.
rain.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, good.
So
I'm sure you guys could probably benefit from a little bit of rain out there.
yes, absolutely. Oh, what was your
Um,
question, Talon?
You had mentioned different beneficial insects and those kinds of things. Do you have maybe like a what are some of those beneficial insects that you'd see probably an increase in with having these, and maybe what kind of pests would they control?
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing to keep in mind is, of course, actually, here's one right here. There is the soldier beetle. So you can't really zoom right in. So soldier beetles, they're actually kind of a pollinator. They can be beneficial. Here's a lady beetle right there. So even though I think this is like mare's tail or something, there's going to be things like lady beetles, different types of predatory insects like robber flies and um, things on the ground as well, ground beetles. Really, when you have a lot of diversity on the ground, you can end up with a lot more ground dwelling predators like spiders, ground beetles, things like that. They're going to be eating pests. Of course, things that are on the ground, like, you know, wire worms sometimes, and what are the roly polies, pill bugs. There's some species of spider that will feed on them, and they can be a pest sometimes in soybeans and other types of crops. Um, yeah, it really just depends on kind of the mix that you have and your location, but definitely going to have pollinators and things when you have your blooming plants. And actually, this is all Palmer amaranth, but if you guys see those black insects, those are um, Meloidy or blister beetles. So blister beetles actually like to feed on Palmer. Unfortunately, not to the extent that they will actually really control it, but still, it's good to see. Just walking through here, finding these insects, um, you know, feeding on the different plants. Of course, when you have this kind of diversity, you're also going to have pest species that come in, things like grasshoppers and whatnot. But it's really about a balance. We need the pest species are oftentimes food for the beneficials. So if we can support that beneficial population, they'll help to keep the pest species in check.
Yeah, those pests will may move in, but hopefully kept it kind of like below those economic thresholds and things. That way, I mean, they may be present, but they're not really causing damage. They're just
Yep,
present is all. And so,
exactly. And one of the nice things too, I guess, too, is as long as the numbers don't get too high with grasshoppers, this is almost kind of a trap crop for them. They'll hang out in the prairie strips, you know,
yeah,
feeding on that, and they're less likely then to move into the crop field. Of
definitely.
course, yeah, if it gets to
So
be too high, but
I can kind of see some of the rain occasionally. Hopefully, you're not getting rained on too hard, but would
nope,
you
it's
say that
fine.
this is a little bit more resilient for like a dry land area that's maybe like low, not very productive, or a product or just a not very productive area that's maybe dry land could be put into this probably fairly easily and be more resilient?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, especially since, out here, our annual rainfall is less than 20 inches in this part of the state. And we have our established prairie strips even on the dry land. So I think it's definitely an option that could be really helpful. Um, Real quick, this looks like an area that an animal bedded down in. So again, wildlife habitat. And another thing about the insects, when we have, even the pest insects, remember I mentioned pheasants. The pheasants feed on insects. So they're going to feed on a lot of those things as well. So it's really about kind of having that balance of all the different, I guess, really the higher diversity of life you can have, the better, because it's going to balance out.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's really cool. We were actually able to see all those insects really pretty well that you were showing. So it's kind of cool that you were able to just do a short walk through there and find, I mean, I think you showed at least three different types of beetles there,
Yep,
which
yep.
is pretty awesome. Um, would you say on something like this, is there a like a minimum number of species of like plant species that need to go into it, or are they like set mixes that are required? I know you had talked a little bit about that.
Yeah. And that's really dependent on the state. So different states and locations within a state are going to have different requirements. So I think, for us, the lower diversity was 7 species of grass and then the 16 species of forbs and legumes. But I think there's probably options to have fewer species if that's what folks want to do. We just definitely don't want it to be a monoculture or just 1 or 2 species. But I would just really stress that folks should reach out to their FSA, their USDA Service Center, because they'll have somebody that is kind of an expert in their area that can help them kind of select the best mix for them and
Hmm.
ensure that it's establishes well and is, successful.
Yeah, definitely. No, do you
So,
know when they put this prairie strip in, did they like broadcast all those seeds? Is that the normal?
we used a drill.
Did you
We
drill?
drilled
Okay.
them in. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep, we
Well,
drilled
that's
it
good. It
in.
looks like, I mean, it looks pretty well filled in and everything. So that's good to hear that this was planted in 2023. So it only took, I guess,
Yep, we
I don't
did.
know how it looked last year, but 3 years, it looks pretty
It
robust.
does. It looks much better than it did. That's another thing people want to keep in mind is the first year or two, it might look really kind of bad. It might look a little bit like, oh, I've just got a bunch of weeds here. But you just kind of got to give it that time to get established. And yeah, it fills in well. And one thing that's cool with this, with our time lapse camera, is during the winter we can kind of see if we get snowfall, how the snowfall will hang around longer in the
Hmm.
prairie strip area. So, we're getting that better infiltration than even on a no-till crop field doesn't have quite the amount of vegetation. So just those benefits are pretty cool to see.
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm glad you were able to show this. I've been kind of interested on what growers can do on some of those less productive areas and those
Yep.
kinds of things. Do you know, are there any potentials for like grazing prairie strips or conservation areas? I think I've seen some of it, but I'm not sure if that's a common
Yeah,
practice.
I think, that's one thing I was checking on Iowa State with their research. They haven't done a ton of research on that, but I think again, it's probably depends on the state, but I think that that might be an option for folks is to do grazing on the prairie strips as well. I
Yeah.
think there just might be certain restrictions or certain guidelines they have to follow.
Yeah. I know back when those fires were going on this spring, there were some emergency haying and grazing options for some of those conservation areas in times of obviously like
Sure,
fires
sure.
and things like that, emergencies. I just didn't know if that's an option maybe there. Um,
That it could
Hopefully we
be,
don't
and
have any more fires that we need to potentially graze these kinds of areas, but just
yeah,
as a way to offset that a little bit.
definitely. I think it's probably an option, and once again, I think that's really the FSA would be able to confirm
Mm.
what those guidelines would be. There's a butterfly in here, right there on the grass. You can see it.
Awesome.
So there's a little pollinator. So
Yeah,
yeah, um,
good deal.
they're they're pretty they're pretty cool. Just the benefits you can get from them, and we're hoping to do was kind of some more trials and field days out here for folks to be able to come out and see the prairie strips and learn more about them. So
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's great. So,
cool.
otherwise, this was, yeah, Talon Muse and Samantha Daniel sharing a little bit about prairie strips out at the Grant Stumpf Research Center.
Yep.
Um, and so thank you for those that tuned in. We had a handful here join this morning, so thank you for coming and watching. Other than that, a few Scout Nebraska updates. We do still have a couple active bounties. So if you're finding white mold or tar spot out in your fields, tar spot has really ramped up here in the last couple days or weeks even. And so if you can catch a quick video of that and show it off in your county and your region, you can post that on X or Facebook and use the hashtag Scout Nebraska and get entered into a raffle. And so those are still open. Feel free to look more into our bounties. Otherwise, we do have some other events coming up other than our kind of weekly scouting trips, like what Samantha's helping us out with today. We will be at the Husker Harvest Days event on September 15th through 17th, I believe. We will have a spot just outside their grounds by the university's research and demo plots. And so there's some nitrogen studies going on there, and Scout Nebraska will be present there that morning and doing some scouting and those kinds of things that'll be live here. And then I'm hoping to maybe do some scouting competitions if there are some people that are interested in doing some of that out at those research plots. So feel free to come stop by the extension kind of demos there out front of Husker Harvest Days or even in the booth there at the big red building. So thank you for those that joined, and big thanks to Samantha for helping us out.
Yeah. Thank
Anything
you,
else,
Talon.
Samantha, that you have?
I don't think so. You can see on the sign there, you can go to www.prairiestrips.org to get more information about prairie strips and just kind of see if that's something that might be good for your operation. But
Yeah.
thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you very much. You guys all have a nice day.